Hi gang, it's Miss Tinks here. I hope everybody is well and having a lovely day. I am going to be filming my most recent blog post today and turning it into a vlog essentially. And the other plan along with that is to hopefully, fingers crossed, be able to turn the audio from today into a podcast as well. That's still very much in the pipeline. It's a goal of mine to work towards. So I thought, why not try it and why not give it a go? So in this video, I will explain the blog that I've already written, and I'm going to try and follow it as closely as possible to the template that I've already written, just so that I don't ad lib on, more importantly, so I don't miss out any of the information. The blog was a while in the making. It was a couple of weeks of me keep mulling it over and going back to it, editing bits in and out, lots of research and lots of neuroscience in there. So I would hate to ad lib and miss anything and put other things in that are less important. If you are more of a if you're more of a learning by listening, then hopefully you'll be okay engaging with this vlog. But like I say, hopefully it will be a podcast. And if you would rather just listen, if you've got a better space, you can be just listening in rather than watching and listening. Everything that will be available will be linked to the video. Similarly, if you'd rather learn by reading, I'll link the blog so that you can read it at your own leisure and at your own pace as well. So I'm going to get started straight away because Wix seems to think that it's a 5-minute blog post, a 5-minute read. So hopefully I can keep this to a nice short pace for everybody so that it's not too long to watch and not too long to listen to. So my last blog post was all about coexisting concepts while you're learning. And what I mean by that is things that might not necessarily pair up or switchy swap, I like to call it, and kind of alternate, but they tend to do when you're learning, and when you're learning something new, especially when you're trying something for the first time, you know, that kind of initial try of something. So they're concepts that you wouldn't always see together, but they come together a lot when we're giving something a go, something very, very new to us. And the reason that I wanted to put this post together was because, generally speaking, when we're learning something new, it's quite a tricky, usually quite exhausting process, and it's usually something that not everybody looks forward to. So whether it's forming new habits and changing your routine, learning a new skill, getting to grips with new technology at work or new systems, you know, changing routines in classes for those of us that are in education, learning something new usually has stress, anxiety, that fear of failure that inevitably turn up alongside the new thing that you need to learn. So my aim today is to look at ways we can work around this. How can we make this process that little bit less stressful? I've been looking into these concepts, like I say, that tend to overlap during learning, how we can deal with them, how we can take on this new challenge, if nothing else, with more of an understanding of the fact that these concepts overlap, interchange, and that they're there and they're going to happen and it's inevitable, essentially. You know, at least having that understanding is almost a little bit of help that we need when we're doing the learning process of this new activity, like I say, maybe new job role and that sort of thing. So the first two ones I want to talk about are anxiety and confidence and how they tend to overlap and exchange. Research suggests there's two types of anxiety: learning and survival. So both of them are really commonplace when we're taking on something new. Learning anxiety would typically be resistance to change, that fear of failure, that fear of getting it wrong, whereas survival anxiety comes from the understanding that actually change is essential and it will eventually be inevitable, so I'm going to have to get in and get on with it. So the unfortunate reality of this for most adults, especially most grown-up situations, as it were, especially if it's something that somebody else controls, is that it's easier to increase the need for this. It's easier to increase the survival anxiety. If you don't do this now, this is what's going to happen. If you don't learn, this is the consequence, rather than trying to decrease the learning anxieties and try and lessen the gaps and the kind of the education that, you know, and the support systems in place to help those learning anxieties be smaller But unfortunately, like I say, most adults will tend to find that the survival anxiety is made larger. So with children, and hopefully, again, those of us in education, the hope is that will more understanding of the learning process and explaining to them why we're learning and what that learning is for, and helping them understand that mistakes are inevitable and that mistakes are okay, ends up lessening those learning anxieties. But as I say, the unfortunate reality for a lot of adults is because of work commitments, the fact that it's not yourself that's imposing the change. It could be a family member, it could be your boss, and anybody else, that the survival anxiety is much larger and usually much more of a motivation, unfortunately. So with survival anxiety, like I say, it's usually created culturally. Confidence is exactly the same, however. So survival anxiety happens when there's a threat to your role, maybe a threat to a company, a salary, a lifestyle, an existence, that kind of thing. Everybody involved tends to understand that their next could be on the line. It could be them next, and it could be something, there is not usually a good opportunity at the end of the tunnel if this job doesn't get done. Whereas when you're confident with your learning, and again, you do tend to see this in education, and it's usually easier to work with children and young people on this. It's a case of everybody who's involved, everybody who's what I would call a stakeholder or a shareholder, anybody involved in that process understands that the learning is essential, but they understand that because they've had a part in the goal setting process. So they know what the end goal is, and that's why they know they have to learn. And it comes as a result of all the learning and all the changes that have been made to put this goal in place. That's where your confidence will come from. And confidence is that understanding that these things and these practices and principles that you've put in place, they are not fads, they're not trends that have been developed overnight. It's something that we know is important, we know why it's important, we know why we've all got to learn and work towards it, and therefore we're more willing to do that, and it lessens those learning anxieties because we've got an understanding of the end result. So it's something to bear in mind if you're in a position where you could be posing survival anxiety on people, when there's potentially a way around it and helping them to understand and lessen their learning anxieties. It's just a little bit of food for thought, that one, really. And if you're in that position, which of those categories does your anxiety potentially fall into? How could you make yourself more confident by getting to grips with the actual learning? Why are we learning? What is it going to achieve? And understanding that in a bit more detail. So the second thing is the similarities between learning something new and forgetting something old, for example. So there's a lady called Philippa Lally who studied habits for a long time, put lots of research together behind how habits are actually formed. And she suggests that any new habits can take between 18 to 184 days to form. That's from what her studies have shown. Usually kind of the average was about 66 days though. And she also said that learning doesn't have to be practiced every single day, but getting it consistently in those early days helps towards that end goal. So practicing that habit consistently in the first few days and weeks helped to make sure that it was a true habit by the end of what they'd considered their learning process, essentially. And this will link to something that I'm going to go back to later, which is about accountability and self-awareness and habit building and bringing that all together. But a really good way to develop new habits would be things like attaching it to an existing good habit. Okay, attaching it to a habit that you're already doing, or maybe a commitment that's already in place. Some of the examples I list in my blog are things like reading a personal development book whilst you're in the car and your child's football training, for example, or listening to a personal development podcast on the way to work, or fitting things into pockets of time, things that you're already doing that could be used. You could use your time that little bit better. For me, it's things like listening to personal development things while I'm driving, particularly, listening to my motivational playlist while I'm in the shower in the morning to energize myself and get myself feeling good when I'm getting up and getting into my routine and things like that. While I'm lying in bed in the morning on my phone anyway, I might as well do some of my Welsh lessons on Duolingo because it's moving me in line with where I want to be. So it's about attaching new things you want to try to existing things that are already there, trying to turn over your entire routine and start again. Usually, unless you've got some serious motivation behind you and probably a little bit of that survival anxiety behind you, usually it won't work out in that way. So new learning, like I say, is best facilitated through these small and manageable changes rather than that epic lifestyle switch that I've just talked about, because the majority of the time, without that enormous survival anxiety behind you, it's not sustainable. It causes burnout. And this, again, is something I'm going to come back onto a little bit later on. So that's learning new habits and how we would probably form something we needed to try that might help the learning process. When we're forgetting them, though, it can sometimes be just as important to the learning process. Forgetting bad habits or potentially forgetting something that might be detrimental towards your end goal, so it's not necessarily a bad habit as a label, but it's something that is not going to help what you want to achieve currently and this learning that you're trying to put in place. So the same time and dedication needed to make habits can be applied to breaking and changing habits. And like I say, not necessarily a bad habit, but anything that isn't helping you get to where you want to be or achieve what you want to achieve through these learning steps. The main strategy that's often adopted when you want to try and break an unwanted habit is to understand how the habit process works. So establish the trigger for the habit, something you would normally do. So what normally causes you to do that habit? And then from there, alter that automatic thing, that automation that you do, and give yourself a new reward as an end result. So I'll give you a really quick example of mine. On a Wednesday, I go to dance class. I dance for about an hour, 50 minutes, an hour, something like that. And on the way home, inevitably, purely because I drive past, I stop at the kebab shop and I get a chicken burger on the way home. That is honestly automatic. Now, I'm not going to stop going to dance class. I love it. It's good for me. Okay. My trigger is the fact that I go out to dance class, because I wouldn't have that chicken burger if I wasn't if I didn't go to dance. It's because I'm already out and I'm driving back past it. So my trigger is going to dance class, but my new automation might be take a different route home than you don't drive past the kebab shop. And when you get home, my new reward is a nice meal that I've planned or got ready or started to prep, or at least have in my head what I'm going to make when I get back, so that I'm not spending money, detrimental to my end goal, eating unhealthily, detrimental to my end goal. So it's about changing little things along the way, rather than, again, that enormous upheaval of your current situation and your current lifestyle that just would not be sustainable in the long term. It might work for a week, 2 weeks, and then you just realize it's just not feasible. So it's also important to remember with some of these habits and some of the things that you do, it's not always necessarily easy to regulate thoughts and feelings. So I know I wouldn't feel very happy about driving a different way home and avoiding going to the kebab shop. I know my head, I'd be saying, come on, treat yourself. You've worked really hard. Let's go for it. But I also know that I can control my behavior and I can stick to my guns with my own mind, because playing within your own mind, when you're breaking habits, your mind's going to go, what you're doing, what's going on, this is the way you've always done it. You can't control how you feel or think sometimes, but you can control that behavior, and you can stop that thought, alter it, change it for something new. And that's what most people don't realize, because they get into habits, they get into routines, and they just feel happy sticking with it. And changing that routine up in little manageable ways is usually very, very powerful. So that's something to consider as well. Food for thought. The third thing I want to talk about is having an understanding of being self-aware, but also being accountable at the same time, and having that accountability. So when you're learning something new, it's really easy to fall into the trap of, like I said before, throwing everything that you've got at the task, usually causing an overfocus on that one aspect of your life. And a lot of the time that can result in you falling out of love with what you're learning, falling out of love with this new process, or causing that burnout that we've talked about altogether. Okay. A key part of learning is accountability, but this is a little bit of a double-edged sword. Accountability to make yourself get up and work, but accountability to understand that you also need to rest. Okay. It's having that self-awareness that today might just not be your day. And even somebody like myself who studies personal development, understands neuroscience, quite well, I would say, works really hard at what they do, very conscious of my own time management. Even there are days where even I kind of go, do you know what? Not today. Plans change, commitments spring out of nowhere with the absolute best will in the world. Without a burnout, you are not going to achieve what you set out to achieve in that day. And one of the things that I usually say to myself at that point is, do you know what? Quit while you're ahead. Quit while you are ahead. Because if I push through and burn out, I'm going to lose a good night's sleep tonight. I'm going to lose, my motivation for tomorrow and that sort of thing. Quit while you're ahead. And I'll go and have a hot bath and I'll write my to-do list out, a revised to-do list out for the next day. And I'll go to bed and start again in the morning, because sometimes it just is not doable. And a trait to be mindful of here, particularly when it comes to accountability, is I know I do this. This is a personal thing for me, is I have this uncontrollable need to make sure that I am pleasing people and doing as much as I can for people. And often that pulls me in too many directions. I'm really, really guilty of that happening and making sure that I just do as much as I can to please people rather than focusing on what I need to get done. So I am learning this, and I thought it would be really good to put this in here because it's been very good food for thought for myself. Hopefully you will find it useful as well. If you want to achieve big things, there has to be an element of, I've got to do this for me. I'm busy. I can't, I've got commitments. I've got plans. I've got places I want to be, things I want to achieve. And therefore, this is what I need to be able to do. And I need to put all my focus onto this. And sometimes it's really hard to say that to people because you feel like you're personally letting them down. So something that I read really recently, which was, like I say, that really big light bulb moment for me, was the self-awareness to say yes to the person, but no to the task. So you want to help them. You can say, I'd love to help. I appreciate that you're really, really busy. And I really want to thank you for thinking of me and thinking that I can do this. And that's really, that's really lovely to hear. Thank you. But do you know what? Right now, I have just got too much of my own things going on. I've got too much to focus on to give time to any other projects. I wouldn't be able to do it properly and I wouldn't be able to do it justice. And I don't want to let you down. So the person's understanding that it's not them and it's not personal, and you're removing that personal connection from saying no to people, but you're protecting your time and you're being accountable to yourself and understanding that it's going to be detrimental to that end goal, and you're not going to achieve what you want to achieve if you're too busy doing things for other people. And that's been really powerful for me. And that's something I'm definitely starting to get my head around and get that little bit more used to saying, because it's a difficult one. But being accountable doesn't mean you have to say yes to everything, essentially, is my key message there. Because be accountable to your own goals and your own self, and understand that actually sometimes it's going to pull you in too many directions and make things too difficult for yourself. And again, that causes that burnout and that demotivation. So generally speaking, being accountable comes from the recognition of a few key aspects, okay? If you're especially accountable to other people, but similarly, I find these helpful to understand when I'm accountable to myself, because I am my own boss and I am self-employed. If I didn't do it, who's going to check up? Who's going to know? That's the attitude that a lot of people could have. But I make sure I understand these aspects before I get started on a task, because it helps me to keep myself accountable to myself. So understanding what or who would be able to help when times get tough really does matter. Because like I say, when you're internally reflecting on your own accountability, a lot of the time it's what if I do? And the end goal that you have in mind is quite motivating. So that big picture and the whole reason you're doing the learning and trying something new in the first place is because it's that end goal motivating you. But similarly, also reflecting on what if I don't can be just as powerful. When you realize that the consequences of not doing it are usually more powerful than if you did do it, and what that end goal looks like. So if you didn't do it, what would it look like? If you didn't put this learning into place, what wouldn't happen in the end, and what could happen as a result. Thinking about consequences from both sides of it is really motivating for me. Some people are more motivated by the end picture. People who struggle to see the end picture might be more motivated by what happens if I don't. And it's something to bear in mind that people work in different ways. And actually, I kind of balance between the two. So you might find that you do the same. Having a good understanding of your exact role and responsibilities within any kind of situation helps massively, because if you're on your own, especially, and you need a good idea of what you're aiming for, what you're going to have to do, and again, what the consequences of what you do or don't, what if you do, what if you don't, are really key aspects in understanding what your accountability looks like. And that's something that I've found really useful, is thinking about what if I do, what if I don't, how am I important to this process? How am I important if I do it? How am I important if I don't? Especially when you're working on your own, because essentially, if you don't recognize that you're the most important factor in the process isn't going to get done. So it's a really important one to consider. The final thing we're going to do, and I am conscious this has been far more than 5 minutes, so I am going to speed up a little bit, I promise, is talk about failures versus developments. Okay. Failure is absolutely inevitable when it comes to learning. There are very, very few people in the world who can say that they've learned a skill or made something or achieved something without failing, or they've invented something new on the first prototype. Doesn't work like that. Doesn't work like that. If anybody is a Friends fan, I'm ad-libbing again, but it's just come to my head. If anybody is a Friends fan, you might remember the scene where Monica's boyfriend Pete talks about how he created the program Moss 865 or something, whatever it's called. And like Moss 1 burnt down his mum and dad's garage, and then there was one that would only set appointments in January, there was one that would only do this, and he said like the 865 is the number of times I have had to restart this software and do this again. And that is one, that is playing on one of the most famous products that was in the world at that time. And it's the same with anything. Okay, there's nobody made something first time and it's been spot on and they've rolled with it. There's nobody achieved something first time without putting hours and weeks and months of practice and hard work and graft in behind the scenes. Okay, but we do have a failure is not an option. I'm sure you've heard that before now. Failure is not an option culture. Okay, and that's essentially what ends up causing these learning anxieties. I hate that saying, failure is not an option. Failure is inevitable. It's going to happen. The difference is, and I'm getting ahead of myself, the difference is whether or not it's how you respond to that failure and what you do with it that makes the massive difference. And again, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. People become afraid to learn because they are afraid to fail. And that's all it boils down to. That's the majority of learning anxiety, is if I learn and get it wrong, I have failed. And the failure is not an option culture only makes that worse. Okay. As pressure builds and deadlines loom, this learning anxiety becomes survival anxiety, because people have avoided the process, they've not wanted to do it, and now it's like, I'm going to have to. And learning anxiety swaps for survival anxiety. Okay. Failures in learning should not be avoidable in any way, shape, or form. Instead, it's the recovery. Okay. It's not how we fall, it's how we get back up. Okay. The recovery is the most vital part, and it's understanding how the recovery works and utilizing that recovery that changes this learning process. Okay. I know I would feel 110% better about making a mistake if I knew that I'd be shown how to prevent myself from making that mistake again in the future. Okay. And how I could learn from it, how I could just move on and get on with my learning and have another go. Okay. It's also important to note here that obviously failures are not always personal, because you can have things like system breakdowns and things that are beyond a human's control. But again, as I said earlier, the unfortunate reality of this is that in a lot of corporate environments, somebody has to take the blame. And that's a real thought provoker for those people who are listening or watching who are in the corporate world, is to understand that, you know what, sometimes these mistakes are not personal and you've been made to take the blame, but actually it's not you. It's not personal. And regardless of that, again, it is about that response, and it's about that how you get back up. So failure will happen. How we deal with it is the main thing to focus on here, okay? And on the flip side of this, you've got the developments, okay? Sometimes developments come along and they happen even faster than we could have imagined. There's a few key elements to making some good developments. That's a really hard sentence to say. So when you're trying something new and they tie everything together that I've already basically touched on. So all these aspects of making good developments come from everything we've already talked about. If all your stakeholders who need to be involved in this learning process understand the objective, developments will happen. If the systems and the strategies that you're putting in place are based on principles and values that these stakeholders have had an involvement in building, rather than this is a fad, this is a trend, we need to jump on it, we need to give it a go, developments will happen. If everybody understands their purpose and understands their responsibility and who they need to be accountable to within that system, there will be developments. And if, based on all of that, the clarity of all of that means that this accountability is strong, okay? And it creates synergy and people want to work together and be accountable to each other. And there are actually companies around the world that adopt this culture of failure and encourage a culture of failure. And they understand that it's okay to make mistakes. In fact, like I say, the mistakes are encouraged so that everybody can learn from them and build on them and make sure that A, it doesn't happen again, but B, that a development and something can be learned and taken from that experience, okay? Like I said earlier, failures are usually encouraged and facilitated during our educational years. This is something you see a lot in primary school. Children have posters up on the wall that say, fail is first attempt in learning. You know, they're encouraged to keep trying and never give up. But once you get to your adult years, it's usually seen as a sign of weakness, failure, and it shouldn't be, because failure is absolutely inevitable. And people who recognize that and work with that, you would probably tend to find are more successful. You look at the amount of people you would consider successful, the people who you see having quotes made about them on social media, and you look at the amount of them that will openly admit that there have been failures massively in their lives, and you can see that the two begin to correlate. We know that children thrive on well-established systems. They thrive on consistency. They thrive on knowing where they fit into the system, you know, what their responsibilities are. Why would this not work for adults? And why would you not be able to impose this on yourself and work with it when we know it works so well with children and young people? So as I say, all these concepts, they cross over, they interchange, they switch and swap, and you'll come across them all at some point during the learning process at different stages. Understanding this, and hopefully now you've listened or watched what I've said today, it gives you a little bit more of an understanding, and you can anticipate that these things are going to happen. You've hopefully maybe got some ways that you can cope and move and work with the things that you're going to come across and these concepts. And hopefully they'll help you on your journey to achieving something new. Okay, so as I say, everything will be uploaded. The video is going on YouTube. I will point you in the direction of the audio as soon as I've got it, as soon as I have it. I will also link in the blog if you'd rather read this in your own time. There are less anecdotes in the blog version. I would have been done about 20 minutes ago if I'd have just read it word for word. You know what I'm like though, I like to chat. If there's anything that you want me to cover particularly, please do, because I put this on my social media. So my original Coexisting Concepts was just a picture of the jigsaw pieces. And somebody said, well, I need this in more detail. I need to know what you mean. And that's where this has come from. I went away, I researched it in more detail, and this is where this has come from. And so if you want me to cover anything in particular, anything that you've heard, you want to know more about but don't understand, please just ask, because that's what I'm here for. So yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to tell you today. I've covered everything that was in my blog, like I say, and all the links will be here for you. Have a fantastic rest of the day. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And if you are watching this through YouTube and would be willing to subscribe, that would be amazing, because I would like to do more content like this. And to be honest, you can see, you know, all of my first videos have been in my room. I'm in my room at my desk now. I do have a garden office coming. It's taking longer than planned. And I have honestly been putting things off because I wanted to start filming from the office before I did any more new content. But I'm again getting out of my comfort zone, recognizing that it's a little bit of a failure in terms of my social media journey because I wanted that office before I did anything else. But we've got to move, we've got to roll with it. So I apologize for the radio silence on that front. Any subscribers, my content will be more regular from here on out because it's not that scary. Yes, you can see parts of my bedroom. Does it really matter? No, we move, we go with it. So thank you very much for watching and listening. Like I say, please show the love. I really do appreciate it. And if there's anything I can do to help, please just reach out. I'll pop my link tree in with all my socials so you can find me on all my platforms. Have a great day, gang. Believing is just the beginning.